ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له. وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء. واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحم إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. أما بعد، من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له. إن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله وأحسن الحديث حديث محمد وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثات بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah. We begin in the name of Allah, the most merciful, the especially merciful. We ask Allah to send peace and blessings on His final messenger, Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in His book, rectify that which is between yourselves. And He mentions in Surah number 8, we've mentioned this before, we're going to keep mentioning it again and again, that He says you were on the brink of a pit of fire, and Allah saved you from that. And He made of you brothers. And only Allah could do this. And it's mentioned in the same surah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala specifies to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, even if you, Muhammad, even if the Prophet himself, peace be upon him, even if he had spent all the wealth in the world and put all of his energy and all of his efforts into bringing people's hearts together like that, he would not have been able to succeed. But Allah, God, succeeded in bringing those people's hearts together. There is nothing a human being can do to force the hearts to come together. There is very little a human being can do, in fact, to force people to do anything. Most of the power people have to compel people to do things is really an illusion. And even when they think that they've succeeded, it usually backfires and just results in more problems. But everybody has this mindset that we somehow, through our actions, can kind of compel things to be a certain way, force people to be a certain way. And then because what we're trying to force to happen is a good thing, it is noble for us to put all of our efforts and our stress into this. And this ends up stressing people out. This ends up exhausting relationships and exhausting the people. When the reality is you can do what you can do, but in the end, only Allah puts that love and that brotherhood between you. The Messenger of Allah ﷺ said, you will be with the ones you love. And this was regarding a brother who had said, he'd asked about the Day of Judgment. And the Prophet ﷺ said, what have you put aside for it? Like, what have you invested? What have you had ready? What are you preparing for that? And the companion said, nothing. I have no preparation at all. Except that I love Allah and His Messenger. And the Prophet ﷺ said, you will be with the ones you love. And the companion said, me and the other companions at that time, sitting around hearing that, we had never been so happy to hear him say anything as to say that. The reason why people will be with the ones they love, and the reason why these relationships are so important, is because the relationships for the sake of Allah are the actual substance of much of what Allah wants us to do. And they are the actual practical day-to-day reality of what's actually getting us there. They're actually meaning the day-to-day reality of that. When people fall out with people, they like to say, I only care what Allah thinks. I don't care what people say about me or what they think about me. Which is interesting, because when things are going very well, prior to that, that wasn't their actual behavior. You know, they actually did care a great deal what people thought of them when they could get something from them. Right? And everyone is extremely conscious of what other people think, especially in this day and age, the internet and all these things. Like, you're constantly concerned with what people think. When things go bad, just like, human nature throughout time, what do? You run to God. All of a sudden, you're the most God-fearing person. I only care what God thinks. I don't care what they say. Right? And 60% of the time, you probably actually did something to earn people feeling that way. Sometimes you didn't, but the majority of the time, you probably did. Even if you are oppressed in the situation, usually you had some part. It's rare that it's just a pure, victim and abuser situation. Usually there's some things you could have handled better, right? But all of a sudden, I only care what Allah thinks. But in reality, what's going to make matters right between you and Allah is making matters right with other people. Ibn Khaldun mentions that the distinguishing characteristics of kings, and he mentions that the early Khalifas were not kings. They were not monarchs. They were trustees. They were guardians who the Muslims viewed as being entrusted to be guardians of the community for a certain amount of time. They were not kings. They were not monarchs. And he says that the characteristic of monarchy that differentiates that from just khilafah, from just sovereignty, is that monarchs are characterized by force, and by forcing people to do things, and by ruling through fear of violence. That the king has the power. In European theology, they took it further, and they said that basically what the king does is synonymous with what God does. And the king actually has a right over the life of every person in the kingdom. Right? It's not the rule of law, it's the rule of the king. The king can say, this person should die. And he has the same authority to say that you should die that God has to say, because he's the representative of God. It's a very twisted way they took this. So Ibn Khaldun is kind of saying this is one of the characteristics of kings, right? This kind of attitude of ruling through force. What's interesting about that, and we could go on a whole clip about the Western and modern concepts of politics. Now, politics is based on force and compelling and coercing people. Political science is one of the first things you're going to learn. Realpolitik. The idea that you have to separate what should be from what is. At the end of the day, politics is based on how it is. Right? What does a bully say? This is what it is, bro. This is what it is. It don't matter about you talking about what it should be or whatever. I have force on my side. I'm about to depot the situation. This is what it is. And then politics is based on that. Interestingly, the word that we use for politics, siyasa, Arabic word, means to balance matters and balance out the differences between people. It has nothing to do with compelling through force, although that may get involved. I'm not saying you don't have to use force now and again. But the basis of our politics, and we perceive from this premise, we can understand that the basis or the foundations of the politics of the people of God is not based on force, it's not based on coercion and the fear and the threat of violence. It's based on balancing. It's based on rectifying what is between yourselves, as the law says. Rectifying what is between people, because if matters are not rectified between them, how can there be this brotherhood of godly love? If I'm doing this one dirty and doing that one dirty and there's oppression, then it's not, you can say all day, well, we should turn the other cheek and it should be good, all good, and we should, love God together and just let it go. But it's like, if there's no balance, you're going to come up with an unbalanced situation. So this balancing, this siyasa, this structure, this politics is necessary to put things in balance so this brotherly love can occur. I will go further and say, and discuss this with Allah, our entire political structure as a community, again, political in the sense of siyasa, not in this kind of Machiavellian Western sense, but in the Islamic sense of siyasa. Our entire political structure and our whole struggle in this country should all be built on this. It's not built on games of force, manipulation, or sheer power. It's about making things good between people at the root of it. If we don't go about this process, if we don't go about rectifying things in our own house, making matters right between us and other people, then we won't have any foundation to stand upon when we go to the next level. There will be nothing to stand upon. And I say further, as successors of the law knows best, that process is only real if it is realer and it is more active in the household than it is in the masjid. That process of rectifying matters, of making matters good with people, and of setting balance so that there can be this brotherly love, that has to be realer and more intensive in our households than it is in the masjid. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told the Israelites during the time, the worst time of their oppression. It says in the song, it was so, the line wrote on Moses, the waterside, the Israelites, they were so oppressed they could not stand, right? There was a time when their children had been killed, they were under extreme repression. And this had already occurred, and then it got worse after, it got even more intensive, one can imagine, or one can conjecture it must have, when Musa alayhi salam goes to the Pharaoh and says, let my people go, right? We know that the Pharaoh started making promises and then people would renege on those promises and people were living in a state of fear, right? And remember, these are slaves, people who were in a situation of slavery. Who couldn't even defend their firstborn babies from being snatched from their arms and killed. You were in that situation of helplessness, and your prophet has gone and spoken this way to the Pharaoh, and the Pharaoh is furious with him. So you're in this extreme situation of oppression on top of oppression. And Allah told the Banu Israel, the Israelites, make your homes masajid. Make your homes mosques. So in the privacy of their home where they were on lockdown, they had to make their home a mosque to strengthen them for what Allah knew was going to come, which was the Exodus, which was to flee. But they had to first make their homes mosques when they didn't have mosques where they could congregate freely. Just like our ancestors didn't have mosques where they could congregate freely. The best we had was the church. And Amir Mustafa, at the beginning of the COVID outbreak, said to our Jumu'ah, our community, when you're on lockdown, everybody's locked out of their houses, make your houses masajid, like the Israelites did in that time. Take advantage of it. Instead of being all depressed and upset and getting into all the politics, take advantage. Be on lockdown. Brothers on lockdown in the prison system, take advantage of that. Come out scholars, come out teaching Arabic, come out all types of stuff. If we locked out in our houses, I'm speaking to myself first. Did we do that? Did we take advantage of those years to make our homes masajid? Speaking to myself first. So this begins in the home. So we have to actualize these things. We gave some quizzes in the past about the 8 duties of brotherhood according to Imam al-Ghazali. It's a good book to get called The Duties of Brotherhood. It's very concise. There's also Adab al-Muashara by our Shaykh Uthman Danfodio, or maybe by Sheikh Abdullahi Danfodio. But one of the Danfodio brothers wrote a book that is based on some of the works of Ghazali called Adab al-Muashara. The duties of brotherhood is helpful because it has it broken down by numbers. So kind of the 8th thing is really useful for me. But some of the points that should be covered in that, and that are more, they're not exactly always addressed, and there are some practical things. Like, for example, first of all, treating parents and elders with reverence, even if they fall short. A practical thing of that in the household, in terms of adab and etiquette. You give the oldest person the best seat. Right? This goes for our parents, and this goes even for people who are already gray-haired and elderly. If someone is older than them also, they should still honor the person who's older. And that's also setting an example, right? And then for everybody, their parents should always be given this honor. The other thing is not attempting to teach them. If you think that the young people, they know something, the older people don't, you don't directly try to teach them, right? You don't directly try to teach your parents. And this goes for older people too. People think when they're young, oh, like I'm kind of repressed, and people tell me like I shouldn't speak out to the elders. So then when they get to be 30, 40 years old, they're like, I'm not a youngster no more. I'll talk however I want to whomever, right? But this still applies. This always applies. When a person is 70, 80 years old, this still applies when you're present with somebody who's 90 and who's on their deathbed, right? And there's ways to share information or whatever, right? But there should be this respect for the hierarchy. There's respect for understanding at the end of the day, we never outrank those people whose shoulders we stand on. And then conversely, younger people should be treated with mercy and respect. Even when we think We know or we think that somebody younger than us is completely wrong. You don't always use that. You don't always need to correct everybody. Even with children, right? Sometimes my son says things I know that completely he's just making this up, right? But he's exercising his imagination, maybe exercising his ego a little bit, trying to tell me about how my car works or what is the best way for me to get hooked or things he had no idea he was talking about. But you don't tell him that. Let him do it, right? And this continues, right? Because there'll come a time when you're always going to know more than other people, but it's like make it easier on the people under you. Also, another thing, and this is something my father mentioned when he was observing some other people. He told me that, and this is confirmed if you look at the text like Prophet Mustafa, or he was called The Stages of the Lives of Man, which is another excerpt from Imam al-Ghazali. When we become old as Muslims, there's this idea in non-Muslim society, you kind of get this license to just be crotchety and negative and mean. It's like, oh, he's old and mean, and I should say it. The person in our tradition, that's not the case. We don't look at somebody who's getting old as they should be miserable because it's terrible to be old. And it's like the worst thing in society to say that somebody's old. We should look at this as this achievement. Because the person has attained to something high, and that person is proud that they've got to that point, and they're content to kind of kick back and be positive and treat people with respect, treat people with mercy. Also, in terms of the senior, and this goes all the way from elderly people all the way down to a kid. The 10-year-old is also a senior and an elder of a 3-year-old. So it applies to all of us. There's none of us who are like, oh, it's about this elders. This don't apply to me. This applies to all of us. You don't offload and complain to the junior. Like younger people in their 20s or like early 20s, my little brother's age, they should come to me and they can come to me with their problems and say, this is my problems, I have stuff going on. With me, if I need to offload something about my problems, it's not going to be my little brother. Right? Maybe now and then I will, but he's not the person to vent to. He shouldn't have to carry all of that, right? I'm at the stage to carry what I'm going through, right? And then I go to my seniors to get like advice and stuff. And this is something you see in our society, that's why I'm addressing it. You see this total imbalance. Like you'll see 60-year-old people seeking advice and teaching and sitting at the feet of even like their children. Like you'll see how parents will be expected to like humble themselves before their children, and the children like tell them how to handle things, right? Even if you were right, even if the child's right, you still don't handle things that way. You can go through, there's a lot of other ways to deal with it, but you don't reverse the roles like that. With wives, this is another widespread problem that's part of why marriage is despised in this society. There's this idea of before you're married, there's this kind of romance, it's glorified for a man to be concerned with the attention of women, for a man to be careful and considerate with women. Once he's married, it's like, well, now you got her in the door, it's locked, and so whatever. Now I'm sitting on the couch, let my belly go out, and you just talk to her any type of way. And people almost like think this is like funny or it's like cute, right? Like, oh, I'm man, like I don't care about this type of stuff, like she was whatever. It's like whatever you were doing to win that woman should continue, even into old age. When we come home as men from work, we have an attitude to come back and be exhausted and be tired. You should take a time to decompress, right? To kind of wash up or whatever, and maybe not be bothered with the children and the women immediately. Then you should get your mind right and attend to the women and children like the woman, like she's a prospective bride, right? Like you haven't won her yet. You got to continue winning her. Attend to the children like it's brand new, like their day is important. You want to hear about what they did today. Not like it's brand new. Or excuse me, not like it's distinguished, it's already done. And the part of that is also taking time away. Men should look good, smell good in the house. They should have this attitude of almost like courtship in the house. Also, men should take time away. The Prophet ﷺ had time for the people. He divided his day into time for the people, time for his wives and his children, and time for himself. This is backwards, this idea that you're just supposed to be like, you want to be like, go to the other opposite extreme and just be like, you're like practically a slave of the wife and the children. Or you're just so attached to them that you like never leave their presence, you're just completely housebound. This is what drives people crazy. This is what results in a lot of problems. It's good for a man to take time away from his wife, take time away from them, so that when he comes back, it's easier for him to bring his best self. And the same thing with children. If the wife argues or kind of trips out, men should be humorous about that. Humorous without dismissing it. Even if she's tripping and it's some total nonsense that deserves to be dismissed, try not to do that. It's hard as a man to not do that, to not be dismissive. Make it seem like it matters anyway. The prophet said something to be considerate of people, even when they were talking total nonsense. Just be considerate so people feel like they matter. See the good in a woman, don't see her bad, and don't be concerned with the bad. Also, one of our teachers mentioned in this topic, this one, that when the Quran says that there's a degree men have over women, he said our teacher's opinion, he said what that means is that there's a degree of nobility men have that women don't. Which is that when a woman, if you take her rights, then the contract between y'all is done. You take her rights, she takes your rights. You're not bringing home money, you're not taking care of her when you're supposed to, and you have the means to do so, but you're not doing it, then she's not going to pay you, period. He said, men, though, if women take our rights, we be patient with that. We turn the other cheek. Right? And some people expect women to do that. It's bizarre. Like, they expect women to act like some type of doormat. But if we're really the stronger one, if we only are, then should we not be the one to handle that burden on our shoulders? And Allah knows best. The same thing goes the other way in terms of edda. There's this attitude again with men with their husband, nowadays it's cool to just emphasize the rights of women, and people tend to just be toxically, no one can really be balanced. So you can't have both. And you either just gotta demand that men be worshipped and not mention the rights of women, or always have something to say, or we gotta go to the other extreme, and it's like you're not allowed to talk about the enormous rank that Allah has given men in this community and given them mainly in their households. Right? The sisters use the same stuff. Look good, smell good, excellent hygiene. Some of the same etiquettes apply with the husband that apply with the amir, using men in their amir. But they're more intensive there, obviously. One of them is not arguing. Not questioning all the time his decisions. Not questioning also is rude in general to always be asking a Muslim where they're going. Like you see it's a good adab, you see somebody, don't ask them, where you been or where you headed to. They might be headed to somewhere haram. So ask them, how are you? How is your family? Find something else to ask them. It's considered technically, it's not the best way to ask them where are you going or where you just coming out of. It's just like going into their business. Even more so if you're talking to your amir, right? And when a woman talks to her husband, she's talking to her amir. Don't be prying and questioning him about where he's going. Right? If he has conduct and character such that you have reason to be worried about where he's going, then that's a separate issue that needs to be addressed. But if it's not that case, if there's not actual suspicion that he has given reason for you to be suspicious, other than that, don't bother me about that. It's a man's business what he's doing. And the same thing, when a man comes home, he should be treated like an honored guest, given the best seat. It should be made sure that the house smells good, it looks good, and so on and so forth. There's no guest, and I say that one of the ways to measure this, whatever a sister will do for any honored guest, especially any male guest, like if the imam came over, or the sheikh came over to visit. The sheikh and the imam's right over her is not as strong as the husband's. So whatever she should be doing for some other man who's a stranger, it should be just as strong or stronger for the husband. Right? And obviously this can't be maintained every single time. There are legitimate times like you got 6 kids, you can't. We're talking about within the scope of what's reasonable, what you can do, you should be doing everything you can do. And this applies to everyone, to the men and the women. And the general lesson of all of these things are to be applied in the household. They are not to be just applied outside. I've seen so many situations where people who have excellent character in the masjid. They have excellent character with their brothers. They're so permissive and patient with the young ones outside of their home. I've known older people who I could go to with anything. They were so patient with me, right? And in their house, they were an iron fist with their kids. No patience at all with their own children, right? And the same thing, like people will be like, I wouldn't talk to just any person this way, but you're my brother or my sister, so I'll just talk to you anyway. Just be family. Like that, there's no room for that. And it's very commonplace. You got to do away with this idea that the etiquettes are outside. Whatever we're talking about, when we talk about these principles, this isn't for you to go and flex on Jumuah with. This is for you to go home to your family and be good to your family. And that's what's hard. That's what's hard. We ask Allah to give us strength in that matter. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي